The fog clung to Whitmore Naval Academy like a burial shroud that October morning, swallowing the iron gates and stone buildings in a gray so thick it seemed to muffle sound itself. Lieutenant Commander Renata Voss stood at the entrance with a duffel bag over her shoulder, her posture deliberately slouched, her eyes cast downward in a performance of uncertainty she had rehearsed for 3 weeks. To anyone watching, she was Maya Castellan, a 22-year-old transfer student from a community college in Nevada who had somehow scraped together enough credits and recommendations to land a spot at one of the most prestigious military training academies on the Eastern Seaboard. To herself, she was a ghost returning to the place where her cousin had died. 2 years, she thought as she shuffled through the gates with a group of other new arrivals. 2 years since Darius stopped answering calls. 2 years since the official report landed on her desk with words like accidental and training mishap and regrettable loss printed in bureaucratic detachment. 2 years of questions that nobody wanted to answer. The processing center smelled of industrial cleaner and nervous sweat. Renata took her place in line behind a broad-shouldered young man who kept cracking his knuckles and ahead of a woman who whispered prayers under her breath. She made herself small. She fumbled with her paperwork when the administrative officer called her forward. She stammered through her answers about her background, her training history, her reasons for pursuing a military career. The officer barely looked at her, stamping forms with mechanical efficiency before waving her toward the equipment distribution window. A cadet with sergeant stripes handed her bedding and uniforms without meeting her eyes. "Next," he said before she could thank him. She gathered her supplies awkwardly, letting a pillowcase slip from her grasp and scatter across the floor. Someone behind her snickered. She apologized too many times as she collected it. This was the role. This was the mask. 15 years of elite combat training, deployments to 6 continents, a classified service record that would make these cadets weep with inadequacy. And here she was playing the part of a woman who could barely tie her boots without trembling. The mess hall buzzed with the particular energy of young people testing hierarchies. Renata collected a tray of food she did not intend to eat and scanned the room with eyes that cataloged exits, sight lines, and threat clusters while appearing to search helplessly for a seat. She found an empty spot at the end of a long table and sat with her shoulders curved inward. She felt him before she saw him. The sudden hush at the tables nearby, the way bodies shifted to create space, the electric tension of deference and fear. Renata kept her gaze on her untouched mashed potatoes as footsteps approached. Well, a voice drawled above her. "What do we have here?" She looked up slowly, performing confusion. A young man stood over her with the kind of face that expensive orthodontics and generations of wealth had sculpted into sharp angles. His uniform bore the insignia of a first-class cadet, and his posture radiated the confidence of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. Thaddeus Warwick, she knew without him saying. Son of Senator Warwick, grandson of Admiral Warwick, great-grandson of a man whose name adorned one of the buildings she had passed on her way in. The file on him was thick with incident reports that had been mysteriously dismissed, complaints that had been quietly withdrawn, and a pattern of behavior that stopped just short of prosecutable. He looked at her the way a cat looks at something small and crawling. "You seem lost," he said. His companions flanked him, 3 young men and a woman with sergeant stripes who watched Renata with predatory interest. This is the cadet mess. The secretarial pool takes their meals in the administration building. Laughter rippled around them. Renata let her cheeks flush. She let her hands shake slightly as she gripped her tray. "I am sorry," she said, her voice small. "I'm a new cadet. I transferred from Nevada." "Nevada," Warwick repeated, tasting the word like something unpleasant. He leaned closer. "Let me give you some advice, Nevada. This academy has traditions, standards. We do not coddle weakness here." He straightened, adjusting his cuffs. "Enjoy your meal." His smile did not reach his eyes. "While you can." They left her there, surrounded by the nervous silence of witnesses who had seen this performance before and knew better than to intervene. Renata forced herself to take a bite of cold mashed potatoes. She made herself chew and swallow while her mind filed away every detail. The way the other cadets avoided eye contact, the subtle fear in their postures, the resignation of those who had learned that some people were simply untouchable. Her barracks assignment placed her in a converted storage building at the far edge of campus, the kind of housing reserved for transfers and scholarship students and anyone else the academy wanted to forget. She found her bunk in a room shared with 7 other women and began unpacking with deliberate clumsiness, dropping items, apologizing to roommates who barely acknowledged her existence. It was only when lights went out that she allowed herself to stop performing. She lay in the darkness listening to the breathing of strangers and ran her fingers along the underside of her bunk frame until she found it. A name scratched into the wood with something sharp. Darius. Her cousin had slept in this exact bed. Renata closed her eyes and made a promise in the silence of her heart. She would find out what happened. She would expose every person responsible, and she would make certain that no one else died in this place, because powerful families believe their children were above consequences. Before we continue this story, take a moment and drop a comment letting us know what state or country you are watching from tonight. Perhaps there's a military academy near you, or maybe you know someone who had to hide their true strength to uncover the truth. Share where you are, and let us continue together. The next morning came gray and cold. The first week at Whitmore Naval Academy moved with the grinding rhythm of institutional routine. Renata woke at 0500 with the other cadets, made her bunk with corners that were acceptable but never exceptional, and shuffled through physical training with the careful mediocrity of someone determined not to stand out. She ran at the middle of the pack. She completed push-ups with visible strain. She climbed ropes with the hesitant progress of a woman who had never been taught proper technique. Every night she returned to her bunk, exhausted from the effort of pretending to be exhausted. The whispers began on the 3rd day. Renata first heard them in the showers, voices echoing off tile walls and fragments she was meant to overhear. The proving, someone said. Midnight summons. Building 7. She filed each word away while shampooing her hair with trembling hands that no one was watching. A cadet named Yusuf Tambor approached her during lunch on the 4th day. He was thin and careful in his movements, a scholarship student from Michigan whose file indicated exceptional academic performance and a notable absence of disciplinary incidents. He sat across from her without asking permission and spoke while staring at his food. "You should keep your head down," he said quietly. "The people who run things here, they notice when someone new arrives. They test them." Renata let confusion wash across her features. "Test them how?" she asked. Yusuf glanced around the mess hall before answering. His eyes lingered on a table in the corner where Warwick held court with his inner circle. "There are traditions," he said. "Old ones. The administration pretends they do not exist, but everyone knows." He pushed beans around his plate. A cadet last semester fell from a training tower, broke his collarbone and 3 ribs. The official report said he slipped. "What do you say?" Renata asked. Yusuf finally met her eyes. His gaze held the exhausted weight of someone who had seen too much and could do nothing about it. "I say he screamed for 10 minutes before anyone came to help him. I say I heard laughing from the top of that tower." He stood abruptly, collecting his tray. "Just keep your head down, Avada. Some of us are not protected the way others are." He left her alone with cold food and burning questions. That evening, Renata found an excuse to pass by the library where Master Chief Petty Officer Gideon Cross had established himself as a visiting instructor. He was reviewing equipment manifests when she approached, and to any observer their interaction would appear to be a nervous cadet asking directions from an intimidating senior officer. "Warwick is the center," she said while pretending to study a campus map he had unfolded. "His group calls themselves the Proving. They have been targeting vulnerable cadets for at least 2 years, probably longer. I need access to medical records, disciplinary files, anything that shows the pattern." Cross nodded slowly, his weathered face betraying nothing. "I will see what I can pull from the administrative database." He tapped the map as if indicating a building. "Intel has been tracking financial irregularities in the academy budget. Large donations followed by quietly dismissed complaints. The money trail leads somewhere interesting. How interesting? Renata asked. Cross met her eyes for just a moment. Interesting enough that people in Washington are nervous. He folded the map and handed it to her. Watch yourself, Ghost. Whatever happened to your cousin? These people have been covering their tracks for a long time. They know how to make problems disappear. She took the map and walked away without looking back. The equipment room was empty when Renata entered it 2 hours later, searching for a replacement bootlace she did not actually need. She had counted the seconds between security patrols, noted the camera positions, identified the blind spots. What she had not anticipated was Petra Holbrook waiting in the shadows between storage racks. The sergeant moved fast, grabbing Renata by the collar and slamming her against a row of lockers before she could react. The impact rang through the metal, and Renata let her body go limp with shock she did not feel. Nevada, Holbrook said, her face inches away. Renata could smell coffee on her breath and see the hunger in her eyes, the need to dominate that radiated from her like heat. I've been watching you, asking questions, sitting with Tambor, making friends. I was just trying to find my way around, Renata stammered. She let fear creep into her voice while her mind calculated 17 different ways to incapacitate the woman pinning her. I do not want any trouble. Holbrook smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Trouble is exactly what you have found. She released Renata's collar only to shove her sideways into an open locker. The metal edge bit into her shoulder, and she gasped with pain that was mostly genuine. Let me make something clear. You do not belong here. You are a diversity admission, a box checked by administrators who care more about optics than excellence. And people like you need to learn their place. Renata slid down the locker to the floor, curling into herself. Above her, Holbrook straightened her uniform with precise movements. Consider this your first lesson, the sergeant said. She walked toward the door, pausing to look back. And Nevada? That camera behind you has been broken for 3 months. No one is coming to help you. The door closed with a sound like a cell locking. Renata remained on the floor for exactly 90 seconds, long enough for any observer to believe she was crying. Then she rose, brushed dust from her uniform, and noted that the camera Holbrook had mentioned was indeed dark and powerless. She photographed the bruise forming on her shoulder with a device hidden in her watch. She recorded the time, location, and every word Holbrook had spoken into a file that would eventually become evidence. And she added one more name to the list of people who would answer for what this academy had become. The hunt was only beginning. The harassment began in earnest on the second week. Renata returned to her bunk after morning training to find her uniform shredded, fabric torn into ribbons, and scattered across her mattress like confetti. Her roommates avoided her eyes when she asked if anyone had seen what happened. One of them, a young woman named Priya, whispered an apology as she hurried past, but the apology came with no explanation and no offer to help. She reported the vandalism to her barracks supervisor, a tired lieutenant who took notes without looking up from his desk. Equipment damage, he said flatly. It happens. File a requisition for replacements. His pen scratched across paper in a rhythm that suggested he had written these same words many times before. Dismissed, cadet. 2 days later, her boots disappeared from beside her bunk. She found them eventually, stuffed into a toilet in the communal bathroom, leather soaked and ruined. The day after that, someone poured motor oil into her footlocker, destroying her personal effects and the few photographs she had brought from home. A picture of her and Darius at his graduation from basic training, now nothing but a black smear on glossy paper. She let herself cry over that one, not for the benefit of any observer, but because some wounds did not require performance. The notes started appearing under her pillow, unsigned messages in block letters that promised escalating consequences. You do not belong here, read the first. Go home before we send you home, warned the second. The third contained only 2 words, like Darius. Renata photographed each note before destroying it. She maintained her cover of frightened isolation while her mind worked through the implications. Someone knew who she really was, or at least suspected a connection to her cousin. The investigation had a leak, or Warwick's network had intelligence capabilities she had underestimated. Physical training became a gauntlet. Holbrook, operating in her capacity as cadet leadership, assigned Renata to supplementary conditioning that bordered on punishment. Extra laps around the parade ground. Additional repetitions on every exercise. Stress positions held until her muscles screamed and her vision blurred. Hold that position, Holbrook commanded one morning as Renata trembled in a low squat with her arms extended before her. The other cadets had been dismissed 10 minutes ago. The sun beat down on the concrete, and sweat dripped from Renata's chin in a steady rhythm. Your form is unacceptable, Nevada. Clearly your previous training was as substandard as the rest of you. Renata said nothing. Her thighs burned with an agony that would have broken most people, but she had endured Hell Week. She had survived survival training in 3 different climate extremes. She had held positions far more demanding than this one, while instructors who made Holbrook look like a nursery school teacher screamed obscenities inches from her face. This was nothing, but she let her legs shake. She let her arms drop incrementally. She let a whimper escape her throat that suggested she was approaching her limit. Pathetic, Holbrook said. She circled Renata like a shark sensing blood. I cannot understand why the Academy even admits transfers like you, diluting our standards, weakening our traditions. She stopped directly in front of Renata and leaned close. But do not worry. The proving has ways of separating wheat from chaff. Renata collapsed to the ground, gasping. She looked up at Holbrook with eyes that pleaded for mercy while her mind recorded every word for future testimony. Please, she breathed. I just want to complete my training. I did not want any problems. Holbrook laughed. The sound echoed across the empty training ground. Problems are all you are ever going to have here, Nevada. Get used to it. That night, Renata slipped out of her barracks at 0200. She moved through shadows with the silent precision of someone who had infiltrated enemy compounds in 6 countries, her footsteps making no sound on Duzlik brass. She positioned herself behind a maintenance shed with a clear line of sight to Building 7, the abandoned structure Yusuf had mentioned. At 0230, she saw them. A group of figures emerged from various buildings across campus, converging on Building 7 with the coordinated movement of practiced ritual. She counted 12 cadets, their faces obscured by the darkness. They entered through a side door that should have been locked, and moments later, she heard sounds drifting through broken windows. Chanting at first, low and rhythmic, words she could not quite distinguish. Then a voice she recognized as Warwick's, raised in some kind of proclamation. And finally, cutting through the night like a blade, a scream. It lasted perhaps 10 seconds. A sound of pure terror and pain that echoed off stone walls before cutting off abruptly. Silence followed, thick and terrible. Renata remained motionless in her hiding spot. Every instinct demanded she intervene, breach that building, and neutralize whatever threat was causing that suffering. But she was one operative against an unknown number of hostiles in an unfamiliar structure, with no backup and a cover that would be permanently destroyed by premature action. She had to wait. She had to gather more evidence. She had to be certain. An hour later, the group dispersed as quietly as they had gathered. Renata watched them fade into the darkness before making her own silent retreat to the barracks. The next morning, a cadet from the junior class appeared at breakfast with his arm in a sling. Official word spread that he had fallen from his bunk during a nightmare. His eyes, when Renata caught them across the mess hall, held the hollow look of someone who had learned that screaming would not save him. She added his face to the file growing in her memory. Another victim, another witness, another reason to see this mission through to its end, no matter what it cost her. Master Chief Cross passed her a flash drive disguised as a standard military-issue pen during a chance encounter near the administrative building. Renata pocketed it without breaking stride. 2 professionals exchanging intelligence with the casual invisibility of people who had done this 100 times before. She reviewed the contents that night beneath her blanket, the glow of a small screen illuminating financial records that made her stomach turn. Donation histories from the Warwick family spanning 15 years showed payments to the academy that spiked suspiciously after every major incident. $50,000 3 days after a cadet was hospitalized with internal bleeding. $75,000 a week after another withdrew suddenly and transferred to a civilian university. $100,000 following her cousin's death. But the money did not stop at the academy's general fund. Cross had traced secondary payments flowing from Warwick accounts into a private holding company, and from there into an account registered to a name that made Renata's breath catch in her throat. Commandant Colonel Yvette Marche. The man who ran Whitmore Naval Academy had been taking bribes for over a decade. Every complaint dismissed, every investigation buried, every victim silenced could be traced back to his office and his willingness to sell the safety of his cadets for personal enrichment. The corruption was not a failure of the system. It was the system designed and maintained by the very people entrusted to prevent it. Renata deleted the files from the device and crushed the flash drive beneath her heel. The evidence existed in secure servers now, backed up in locations that Warwick's family could never reach. But evidence alone would not be enough. She needed witnesses willing to testify, and witnesses required trust she had not yet earned. The next morning brought a training exercise that paired cadets randomly for tactical scenarios. Renata found herself matched with Linnea Thorson, the Norwegian exchange student who moved through the academy with the careful grace of someone walking through a minefield. They had been assigned to navigate an obstacle course together, their times recorded as a team. Linnea said little as they approached the first barrier. Her jaw was tight, and her eyes avoided Renata's face with studied determination. They scaled walls and crawled under wire and ran through mud and silence. Their combined time mediocre, but acceptable. It was only at the final obstacle, a rope climb that left them momentarily isolated from observers, that Linnea spoke. "I know what they are doing to you," she said quietly. Her accent softened the words, but her voice carried an undercurrent of something Renata recognized. Shame, guilt, the particular anguish of someone complicit in harm they never intended. Renata let herself hang on the rope, breathing hard from exertion she barely felt. "I do not understand," she said. Linnea climbed higher, putting distance between them and any listening ears. "The proving. I was there when they selected you. Warwick said you would be easy. That transfers always break quickly." She paused, her knuckles white on the rope. "I did not know it would go this far. I thought it was just tradition. Hazing that everyone endures." "What changed?" Renata asked. "The cadet with the sling." Linnea's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I saw what they did to him. I heard him begging." She finally looked at Renata, and her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "This is not tradition. This is something else. Something wrong." Renata filed this moment away with the precision of an operative recognizing an asset. Linnea was cracking. The psychological weight of participation in escalating violence was fracturing her willingness to remain silent. With careful cultivation, she could become a witness. But before Renata could respond, a whistle blew below them. "Time," an instructor shouted. "Descend immediately." They climbed down without another word. Linnea rejoined her usual group, her expression once again carefully blank. But something had shifted between them, a crack in the wall of silence that surrounded the proving. That afternoon, Renata received a summons to Commandant Marche's office. She stood at attention before his mahogany desk while he reviewed a file with her cover identity's name printed on the tab. The office smelled of leather and old books and the particular mustiness of power too long unchallenged. Photographs on the walls showed Marche shaking hands with admirals and senators, and one image that made Renata's pulse quicken. Marche standing beside Warwick's father at what appeared to be a fundraising gala. "Cadet Castellan," Marche said without looking up, "your performance reports indicate you are struggling with the physical demands of our program." He turned a page slowly. "There have also been some concerns raised about your social integration." "Sir," Renata began, her voice trembling appropriately. Marche raised a hand to silence her. "Whitmore Naval Academy has a proud tradition of excellence. We do not graduate cadets who cannot meet our standards, and we do not tolerate those who create discord within our community. He finally met her eyes, and she saw in his gaze the flat calculation of a man who had learned to view people as problems to be managed. I'm told you have been asking questions, making accusations. I have not accused anyone of anything, sir. See that it stays that way. Marsh closed the file with a snap that echoed through the silent office. You are dismissed, cadet. I suggest you focus on your training and leave matters of academy administration to those qualified to handle them. Renata saluted and left the office with her heart pounding against her ribs. The message had been delivered with the subtlety of a hammer. She was being watched. She was being warned. And somewhere in the chain of information that connected Warwick to Holbrook to Marsh, someone had decided she was becoming a problem. Cross was right. These people knew how to make problems disappear. She needed to accelerate the timeline before she became the next accident in Whitmore's long history of convenient tragedies. The note appeared under her pillow 3 nights after the meeting with Marsh. A single sheet of paper folded twice, bearing words that Renata had been expecting since she first set foot on Academy grounds. Building 7. Midnight. Come alone or face consequences. She held the paper in the darkness of her barracks and felt the weight of what it represented. The Proving had selected her. Whatever rituals they performed, whatever violence they inflicted, she would now experience firsthand. The operative in her recognized the opportunity. Direct evidence, recorded testimony, irrefutable proof of criminal conduct. The woman who had loved Darius recognized something else entirely. This was the same summons her cousin had received before he died. Renata spent the hours before midnight in careful preparation. She activated the recording devices concealed in her watch and the fitness tracker on her wrist. She swallowed a GPS transmitter no larger than a vitamin pill that would broadcast her location for the next 12 hours. She stretched muscles that had been deliberately softened by weeks of feigned weakness, feeling the coiled power that remained beneath the performance. Then she walked to Building 7 with the shuffling gait of a terrified cadet who had no choice but to obey. The structure loomed against the night sky like a rotting tooth. Windows that had once held glass now gaped empty, and the walls bore the scars of decades without maintenance. Renata pushed through the side door she had watched others enter and found herself in a corridor thick with dust and the smell of mold. Figures emerged from the shadows ahead. 12 cadets in dark clothing, their faces obscured by masks that reflected what little moonlight penetrated the broken building. They formed a corridor of bodies leading deeper into the structure, and Renata walked between them with her heart pounding visibly in her throat. The main hall had been transformed into something between a courtroom and a cathedral. Candles lined the walls, their flickering light casting dancing shadows across exposed brick and peeling paint. At the center of the space stood Warwick, no longer masked, wearing what appeared to be ceremonial robes over his uniform. His expression held the serene confidence of a priest about to conduct a sacrament. Maya Castellan, he intoned. His voice echoed off the high ceiling with practiced resonance. You have been selected to prove your worth, to demonstrate that you deserve a place among the elite, to show that you are more than the weakness you have displayed. Renata let her voice quaver. Please, I do not understand what this is. I just want to complete my training. Warwick smiled. This is your training, Nevada. The training that matters. He gestured to the masked figures surrounding them. Every leader in this academy, every admiral and general who commands respect, has stood where you stand now. They faced the trials. They proved themselves. He stepped closer, and the candlelight turned his features sharp and cruel. Or they broke. And those who break have no place in our world. The first trial began without further ceremony. 2 masked cadets seized Renata by the arms and forced her into a stress position she recognized from resistance training. Knees bent, back straight, arms extended with palms facing upward. Simple in theory, agonizing in practice when maintained for extended periods. You will hold this position, Warwick explained, until we decide you have proven your endurance. Each time you fall, you will receive correction. The correction came in the form of padded batons wielded by cadets who circled her like vultures. Renata held the position for 3 minutes before allowing herself to waver. The first blow caught her across the shoulders, a stinging impact that drove her forward. She caught herself and resumed the position, gasping. She could have held for hours. She could have taken every strike they delivered without flinching. 15 years of SEAL training had conditioned her to endure pain that would reduce these children to sobbing wrecks. But she needed them to believe she was breaking. She needed them confident enough to reveal themselves fully. So she cried out with each impact. She fell and rose and fell again, her body accumulating bruises that would provide photographic evidence later. She begged for mercy with words that cost her nothing and meant even less. Through it all, she watched. She memorized faces when masks slipped. She noted which cadets struck with genuine cruelty and which hesitated. She identified Holbrook among the attackers, her enthusiasm unmistakable even behind concealment. After what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 40 minutes, Warwick raised his hand. The beating stopped. Renata collapsed to the floor, her breathing ragged and her body trembling with exhaustion she did not entirely have to fake. The stress position combined with repeated impacts had pushed even her conditioned physiology toward its limits. Warwick crouched beside her. His hand gripped her chin and forced her to meet his eyes. "You survived the first trial," he said softly. There was something in his voice now, something that sounded almost like respect mixed with darker hunger. But this is only the beginning. The next trial will test more than your body. He released her chin and stood. "Take her back to the barracks. We will continue her education soon." Hands lifted her from the ground and half carried her through the building. She was deposited outside her barracks door like discarded cargo, left to crawl inside under her own failing power. In the darkness of her bunk, Renata allowed herself a single moment of true feeling. Not pain, though her body ached in a dozen places. Not fear, though the danger was real and escalating. Rage, pure and cold and focused like a blade. Holbrook had whispered something as the beating ended. Words meant only for Renata, spoken close to her ear in a voice thick with anticipation. The last Castellan screamed much louder than you. Right before the end, they had murdered her cousin, and they had enjoyed it. Renata closed her eyes and began planning exactly how she would make them pay. The bruises bloomed across Renata's body like dark flowers over the following days. She moved through training with a visible limp she did not entirely have to exaggerate, and the other cadets gave her a wider berth than before. Word had spread through the barracks in whispers and meaningful glances. Nevada had been to Building 7. Nevada had survived her first trial. Nevada now belonged to a different category of person, someone marked by the proving and forever changed by what happened in that Camelot Hall. Yusuf found her behind the mess hall during a rare moment of solitude. His face carried the particular tension of someone who had been wrestling with a decision and finally reached a conclusion he dreaded. "I heard what happened," he said quietly. His eyes scanned their surroundings with the nervous vigilance of prey animals in open terrain. "I heard you went to Building 7. Renata let exhaustion flatten her voice. "I don't want to talk about it. You need to listen to me." Yusuf stepped closer, his words tumbling out with desperate urgency. "This is not the end for them. The first trial is just the beginning. They test everyone who comes through, but only some get selected for what comes next." He swallowed hard. 2 years ago, a cadet named Marcus went through the trials. He made it through the first 2. He was strong, determined, thought he could outlast them. His hands trembled at his sides. They found him at the bottom of a ravine during a training exercise. Ruled an accident, but I saw his face before they took him away. I saw the fear in his eyes at dinner the night before. He knew something was coming. Renata studied Yusuf's face and saw genuine terror beneath his composure. "How many?" she asked softly. "How many have they hurt? That I know about?" Yusuf's voice dropped to barely a whisper. 7 hospitalized. 3 who left the academy and never spoke publicly about why. And 2 who died. He met her eyes with a desperation that bordered on pleading. You need to leave Nevada. Transfer out. Make up some excuse about family emergency or medical issues. Just get away from here before they decide you are worth making an example of. Why are you telling me this? Renata asked. Why take the risk? Yusuf was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice cracked with old grief. Because one of the two who died was my roommate freshman year. Called him a training accident, too. Said he had a heart condition nobody knew about. But I knew him. I knew he was healthy. And I knew he had been asking questions about the proving right before it happened. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I have been too afraid to say anything for 2 years. I cannot watch them do it again. Renata reached out and touched his arm, a gesture of comfort that was genuine beneath its tactical utility. Thank you, she said, for warning me, for being brave enough to speak. Yusuf shook his head. I am not brave. Brave would have been saying something when it could have saved him. He pulled away and walked toward the mess hall, his shoulders curved under a weight that had nothing to do with physical burden. That evening, Renata arranged another contact with Cross. They met in the chapel during evening services, two figures kneeling in separate pews with heads bowed in apparent prayer. I have confirmation they murdered Darius, she murmured without moving her lips. Holbrook admitted it during my initiation. Said he screamed louder than me. I have it recorded. Cross remained still, but she caught the slight tension in his jaw. That recording may not be admissible given how it was obtained. We need corroborating testimony. I have two potential witnesses. Yusuf Tambor saw patterns and lost a roommate to them. Linnea Thorson participated in rituals and is showing signs of guilt-driven fracture. Either one could break if approached correctly. The timeline is compressing. Cross shifted slightly in his pew. Naval intelligence intercepted communications between Warwick's father and Commandant Marsh. They're discussing something called Final Proving. It is scheduled to coincide with the wilderness survival exercise next month. He paused. Whatever it is, the language suggests it is more dangerous than standard hazing. They're taking precautions to ensure no witnesses survive. Renata felt ice crystallize in her chest. They are planning to kill someone during the exercise. That is the assessment. Cross turned a page in the hymnal he held as cover. Admiral O'Yelleran is under pressure from congressional allies of the Warwick family to shut down our investigation. We may have 2 weeks before our authorization is revoked. Whatever evidence you need to get it before that survival exercise begins. The congregation rose for a hymn, and Renata stood with them. Her voice joined the chorus while her mind raced through scenarios and contingencies. 2 weeks to build a case that would bring down a conspiracy spanning years and reaching into the highest levels of military and political power. 2 weeks to save whoever the proving had selected for their ultimate demonstration. She thought of Darius. She thought of Marcus. She thought of every cadet who had screamed in Building 7 while the academy looked the other way. 2 weeks would have to be enough, because she would not allow another name to be added to that list of the dead. Warwick announced the wilderness survival exercise during morning assembly with the theatrical gravity of a general declaring war. His voice carried across the parade ground as cadets stood in rigid formation beneath a sky heavy with approaching autumn storms. This exercise will separate those who belong at Whitmore from those who merely occupy space, he proclaimed from the raised platform beside Commandant Marsh. Teams will be deployed into the Blackwood Reserve for 48 hours of survival training. No external support, no communication with the academy. Only your skills, your teammates, and your determination to prove your worth. Renata stood in the third row and watched Marsh nod along with paternal approval. The commandant's face betrayed nothing, but she knew what lurked behind that polished facade. Somewhere in the wilderness they would enter, preparations were being made for something far worse than survival training. Team assignments were posted that afternoon. Renata scanned the list and felt her tactical instincts sharpen. She had been placed with 2 of Warwick's most loyal followers. A cadet named Brennan Holt, whose file included 3 dismissed assault complaints, and another named Serena Vance, whose family had donated a new gymnasium 2 years prior. The message was unmistakable. She would be isolated in the wilderness with people who answered directly to Warwick, far from any witnesses or intervention. She found Linnea in the library that evening, pretending to study navigation charts while her eyes stared unfocused at the pages. Renata sat across from her without asking permission. "You have been avoiding me since the obstacle course." Linnea did not look up. "I have been avoiding everyone. Something is happening during the survival exercise." Renata kept her voice low, barely audible above the ambient noise of studying cadets. "Something worse than what happened in Building 7. I think you know what it is." Linnea's hands tightened on the charts until the paper crinkled. "I do not know anything. You know enough to be afraid." Renata leaned forward, letting genuine urgency bleed through her careful performance. "People have died here, Linnea. Not accidents, not training mishaps. Murder covered up by money and power and silence. If you know something that could stop it from happening again, you have to tell me." For a long moment, Linnea remained frozen. Then her shoulders began to shake with suppressed emotion, and when she finally spoke, her voice was fractured. "They call it final proving." She wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. "It happens every few years when someone becomes a liability. Someone who asks too many questions or threatens to expose what we do. They take them into the wilderness and they do not come back." Her accent thickened with distress. "I thought it was legend. Stories told to keep us loyal. But last year, I overheard Warwick talking to Holbrook about your cousin, about how cleanly it was handled, how the family never suspected." Renata absorbed this confirmation like a blow she had been bracing for. Who decides who becomes a liability? Warwick chooses, but Marsh approves. Linnea finally met her eyes, and her gaze held the hollow desperation of someone trapped in a nightmare they could not escape. "They have been watching you since you arrived, asking questions about your background. I think they suspect you are not who you claim to be." The words settled over Renata like ice water. Her cover was compromised. The timeline had just accelerated from urgent to critical. "I need your help," she said quietly. "When this is over, there will be an investigation. People will face justice, but only if there are witnesses willing to speak." She reached across the table and covered Linnea's hand with her own. "You're not like them. I have watched you. The guilt is eating you alive because you have a conscience they never managed to destroy. Help me stop them before anyone else dies." Linnea stared at their joined hands. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. "If I talk," she whispered, "they will destroy me. My career, my family's reputation, everything." "If you do not talk," Renata replied, "someone will die in that wilderness. Maybe me. Maybe another cadet whose only crime was being in the wrong place." She squeezed Linnea's hand. "You can live with ruined reputation. You cannot live with innocent blood on your hands. I have seen what that does to people." The wire snapped. "There's a location," Linnea breathed. "Coordinates in the northwest section of Blackwood Reserve. Warwick has been stockpiling supplies there for weeks. Weapons, restraints, medical equipment that does not match any official inventory." She pulled her hand away and began gathering her charts with shaking movements. "That is where they will take whoever they have selected. That is where final proving happens." "Do you know who they have selected?" Linnea paused at the edge of the table. Her eyes glistened with tears that would not fall. "Yusuf Tambor asked too many questions about his roommate, and you arrived asking questions about your cousin." She swallowed hard. "I think they plan to handle both problems at once." She fled the library before Renata could respond, leaving behind the echo of a warning that changed everything. Renata sat alone among the navigation charts and felt the pieces falling into place with terrible clarity. She was not just investigating anymore. She was a target, and in less than 1 week, she and Yusuf would be led into the wilderness to die, unless she found a way to turn the trap around on those who had set it. The days before the survival exercise passed with the strange compression of time that precedes inevitable confrontation. Renata moved through her routines with heightened awareness, cataloging every glance from Warwick's followers, every whispered conversation that stopped when she approached, every small sign that the machinery of her elimination was grinding toward activation. She met Cross one final time in the maintenance shed behind the athletic complex. Rain hammered the metal roof above them, providing cover for words that could not be overheard. Backup will be staged 6 miles from the reserve boundary, Cross said. His weathered face was tight, with concern he rarely displayed. Storm system moving through will ground helicopters for the first 18 hours after deployment. You will be on your own until it clears. Renata nodded. I have the coordinates Linnea provided. If I can get evidence of the staging site before they move against us, it corroborates everything. Cross handed her a small case containing equipment that looked like standard survival gear, but was anything but. Emergency beacon with 12-hour battery. Satellite uplink disguised as a compass. And this. He pressed a small cylinder into her palm. Concentrated sedative. 3 doses. Non-lethal, but will drop a full-grown man in under 10 seconds. She tucked the items into her pack with practiced efficiency. What about Yusuf? We cannot extract him without blowing your cover entirely. Cross's jaw tightened. If you can keep him alive until backup arrives, we will have 2 witnesses plus whatever evidence you gather. But your primary objective remains the same. Survive. Document. Testify. And if survival requires dropping my cover early. Cross met her eyes with the steady gaze of a man who had sent operatives into danger more times than he could count. Then you do what SEALs do, Ghost. You adapt and overcome. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture of connection. Your cousin will be proud of what you are doing. Finish this for him. The morning of deployment dawned gray and cold. Cadets assembled at the academy gates with packs and determination, their breath fogging an air that smelled of rain and rotting leaves. Renata found her assigned teammates waiting with expressions that confirmed everything she suspected. Holt watched her with the flat anticipation of a predator sizing up prey. Vance smiled with sweetness that never reached her eyes. Ready for an adventure, Nevada? Holt asked as they boarded the transport vehicles. Renata let nervousness flood her voice. I have never done wilderness survival before. I hope I did not slow everyone down. Oh, do not worry. Vance's smile widened. We will make sure you keep up. The drive to Blackwood Reserve took 2 hours through winding mountain roads. Renata watched the landscape change from manicured academy grounds to dense forest that swallowed light and sound. By the time they reached the deployment zone, clouds had thickened into a ceiling of iron gray that promised the storm Cross had warned about. Teams dispersed into the wilderness at 15-minute intervals. Renata caught a glimpse of Yusuf boarding a vehicle with Warwick's team, his face pale with an anxiety that suggested he sensed the danger closing around him. Their eyes met briefly across the staging area, and she tried to convey reassurance she was not certain she felt. Then Holt grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the tree line. Move it, Nevada. We have ground to cover before dark. They hiked for 4 hours through terrain that grew increasingly rugged. Renata deliberately stumbled on roots and rocks, complained about the pace, asked for rest breaks that Holt denied with growing irritation. She was mapping the route in her head, calculating distances from the coordinates Linnea had provided, preparing for the moment when pretense would become impossible. That moment came as the first raindrops began to fall. Holt stopped in a clearing and exchanged a look with Vance that communicated volumes without words. His hand moved to the hunting knife at his belt. Change of plans, Nevada. He stepped toward her with the casual confidence of someone who had done this before. We received special instructions about you. Renata let fear widen her eyes. What are you talking about? Vance circled behind her, cutting off retreat. Warwick has questions about who you really are, about why you're so interested in things that do not concern you. She pulled zip ties from her pack. We're going to take you somewhere quiet for a conversation. Please. Renata backed away, her voice climbing toward panic. I do not understand. I have not done anything wrong. Holt lunged. She could have ended him in that moment, could have shattered his knee and collapsed his windpipe before Vance processed what was happening. But she needed them to lead her to the staging site. She needed evidence that would hold up when this was over. So she let Holt grab her. She let Vance bind her wrists. She let them drag her through the rain toward whatever horror waited at those coordinates. But as they marched her deeper into the wilderness, She felt the weight of the sedative cylinder hidden in her sleeve and allowed herself a small, invisible smile. They thought they were leading a lamb to slaughter. They had no idea they were escorting a wolf into their den. The rain fell harder as they pushed deeper into Blackwood Reserve, turning the forest floor into a treacherous maze of mud and slick stone. Renata stumbled convincingly every few steps, letting Holt yank her forward by the zip ties that bound her wrists while Vance followed with a hand resting on the knife at her hip. They spoke over her head as if she had already ceased to matter. Warwick said to bring her straight to the site. Vance murmured. No detours. What about the other one? Holt replied. Tambor. Already there. Warwick's team grabbed him about an hour ago. Said he went down easy. Started crying before they even touched him. Vance laughed, and the sound was swallowed by the drumming rain. This is going to be quick. Renata filed the information away. Yusuf was already captured, already at the staging site, already in immediate danger. The timeline had compressed beyond what she had anticipated. Whatever happened next would happen fast. They walked for another hour before the trees thinned and a structure emerged from the gloom. It had once been a ranger station, abandoned decades ago when the reserve boundaries shifted. Now it squatted in a clearing like a wounded animal, its windows boarded and its walls stained with years of weather damage. But light flickered through the cracks, and voices drifted from within. Holt pushed Renata toward the door. She let herself fall to her knees in the mud, crying out with theatrical despair. Please, she sobbed. Whatever you think I did not do it. Just let me go. I will transfer out tomorrow. I will never say anything to anyone. Vance hauled her upright by her hair. Too late for that, Nevada. She shoved Renata through the door and into the nightmare that waited inside. The ranger station had been transformed. Tarps covered the windows, blocking any light from escaping. Battery-powered lanterns cast harsh shadows across walls lined with equipment that made Renata's blood chill despite her training. Restraints mounted to support beams. Medical supplies arranged on a folding table. And in the corner, video recording equipment positioned to capture whatever happened in the center of the room. They documented it. They filmed their atrocities like trophies to be preserved. Yusuf knelt in the middle of the floor, his wrists bound behind him and his face swollen from blows already delivered. Blood trickled from a split lip, and his eyes were glassy with terror. When he saw Renata, a sound escaped him that was half sob and half moan of despair. 8 figures surrounded the space. Renata identified Warwick immediately, standing beside a support beam with his arms crossed and his expression serene. Holbrook flanked him, practically vibrating with anticipation. The others were masked, but she recognized body language and movement patterns from her weeks of observation. 6 more of Warwick's inner circle, true believers in whatever twisted ideology justified this horror. And standing apart from the others, her face pale and her hands trembling, was Linnea. Warwick smiled as Holt forced Renata to her knees beside Yusuf. Welcome to Final Proving, Nevada. Or should I say, welcome back to where your family name belongs. He stepped forward, and the lantern light turned his features into something carved from cold stone. Did you really think we would not figure it out? A transfer student who just happens to share a surname with a cadet who died asking inconvenient questions, who just happens to arrive asking those same questions. I do not know what you are talking about. Renata kept her voice high and desperate. My name is Maya Castellan. I am from Nevada. I have never been here before. Warwick crouched before her. His hand shot out and gripped her jaw, forcing her to meet his eyes. Darius Castellan was your cousin. We confirmed it 3 days ago. His smile widened into something terrible. He screamed your name before the end. Begged us to spare you, even though you were not here. Kept saying Renata over and over until he made him stop. The rage that flooded through her was nuclear, white-hot and absolute. It burned away every vestige of the frightened cadet she had been pretending to be. For one heartbeat, she nearly killed him where he knelt. Her hands flexed against her bonds, calculating the angle to drive her forehead into his nose and send bone fragments into his brain. But Yusuf was still bound. Linnea was still frozen in the corner. and the evidence she needed was still recording on those cameras. She forced herself to weep instead. Warwick released her jaw and stood. Tonight, we conclude 2 investigations at once. He gestured to Holbrook, who produced a knife that gleamed in the lantern light. The wilderness is dangerous. Training accidents happen. By morning, 2 troublesome cadets will have succumbed to exposure after wandering away from their teams. He turned to address his followers. This is what the proving exists for: to protect our traditions, to eliminate threats to our legacy, to ensure that people like them never endanger people like us. Holbrook stepped forward, knife raised, her eyes locked on Renata with hunger that bordered on madness. Cross's voice echoed in her memory. Adapt and overcome. Renata took a breath. She centered herself in the calm eye of the storm that had been building since she first read the report of her cousin's death. Then she moved. The zip ties snapped like thread as she surged upward, 15 years of combat training exploding in emotion that no one in that room could comprehend, let alone counter. Her elbow shattered Holbrook's wrist before the knife could fall. Her palm strike sent Warwick sprawling backward into the equipment table, and her voice, when it emerged, carried the command authority of someone who had led warriors into battle. Lieutenant Commander Renata Voss, Naval Special Warfare. She kicked Holbrook's legs out and dropped her to the floor. You are all under arrest. The room froze for exactly 2 seconds. 2 seconds of absolute stillness as 8 minds struggled to process what they had just witnessed. The trembling cadet they had mocked and beaten and dragged through the wilderness had just shattered their enforcer's wrist with a single strike and sent their leader crashing into a table of surgical equipment. Then chaos erupted. 3 masked cadets rushed her simultaneously, their movements telegraphed by panic and poor training. Renata flowed between them like water through grasping fingers. The first received an elbow to the solar plexus that folded him in half. The second caught a knee to the thigh that deadened his leg and dropped him sideways. The third swung wildly at her head, and she ducked beneath the blow, seized his arm, and used his momentum to send him crashing into his recovering companions. For seconds, 3 hostiles down and struggling to breathe. Holt charged from behind, knife drawn, screaming something incoherent about killing her. Renata heard him coming before he closed half the distance. She spun, caught his knife hand at the wrist, and twisted with precise violence. The blade clattered to the floor as his shoulder dislocated with a wet pop. His scream joined the chorus of groaning bodies. Vance scrambled for the door. Renata covered the distance in 3 strides and caught her by the collar, spinning her into the wall with enough force to stun, but not injure permanently. The woman slid down the boards and did not rise. 6 seconds. 5 hostiles neutralized. The remaining 3 masked cadets backed toward the far wall, their earlier confidence evaporating as they watched their leadership crumble. One raised his hands in surrender. Another simply stood frozen, his body refusing commands from a brain that could not process what was happening. The third pulled a handgun from beneath his jacket. Renata moved before conscious thought could form. She crossed the space between them in a heartbeat, her hand closing over the barrel and twisting upward as he pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, punching through the ceiling and showering them with splinters. Her other hand drove into his throat, not hard enough to crush, but enough to make breathing his immediate priority. The gun came free as he collapsed, clutching his neck and gasping. She ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, and tossed the weapon into the shadows with the efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. 9 seconds total. 8 hostiles down. Warwick was rising from the debris of the equipment table, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead and fury twisting his aristocratic features into something unrecognizable. He grabbed a metal rod from the scattered supplies and swung at her head with all the desperate strength of a man watching his empire crumble. Renata blocked the strike with her forearm, ignoring the pain that lanced through the bone. She trapped the rod against her body, pulled Warwick off balance, and drove her forehead into his nose. Cartilage crunched. Blood sprayed. He staggered backward, the rod falling from nerveless fingers. She followed, relentless. A kick to his knee buckled his leg. A palm strike to his chest slammed him against the support beam. Her hand closed around his throat, not squeezing, but holding, forcing him to meet her eyes. "My cousin," she said quietly. Her voice was steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Darius Voss. You murdered him in a place just like this. You filmed it. You laughed about it." Warwick's eyes bulged with terror he had never expected to feel. His hands clawed weakly at her wrist, but his strength was nothing compared to hers. "Please," he gasped. "My father will pay whatever you want. We can make this disappear." Renata leaned closer until her face was inches from his. "I'm not here for money. I am here for justice." She released his throat and stepped back. "And you're going to spend the rest of your life in a cell, remembering this moment." She turned to survey the room. 8 cadets in various states of incapacitation. Holbrook cradling her shattered wrist and weeping. Warwick sliding down the support beam with blood pouring from his ruined nose. The video equipment still recording, capturing everything that had transpired. And in the corner, Yusuf staring at her with an expression that blended shock and dawning hope. Linnea had not moved from her position by the wall. Her face was white as bone, tears streaming down her cheeks as she looked at Renata with something that might have been wonder. "You are really a Navy SEAL?" she whispered. Renata crossed to Yusuf and knelt beside him, producing a small blade from her boot to cut his bonds. "Lieutenant Commander Renata Voss," she confirmed. "I have been investigating this academy for 2 months." She helped him to his feet, steadying him when his legs threatened to buckle. "Are you hurt badly?" Yusuf shook his head slowly, still staring at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "I thought we were going to die. I thought this was the end." Renata squeezed his shoulder. "It is the end, just not for us." She turned to Linnea. "I need you to help me secure them. Can you do that?" Linnea nodded, wiping her face with trembling hands. She moved to the scattered supplies and began collecting zip ties with fingers that gradually steadied. Outside, the storm continued to rage. But inside the ranger station, a different kind of storm had passed, leaving behind the wreckage of a conspiracy that had survived for far too long. Renata pulled the satellite uplink from her pack and activated the emergency beacon. Cross would receive the signal within minutes. Backup would arrive as soon as the weather cleared. Until then, she had prisoners to secure and evidence to preserve. The hunt was over. Now came the reckoning. The hours between the beacon activation and dawn stretched like a hell breath. Renata secured each prisoner with methodical precision, using zip ties and rope from the staging supplies to ensure none could escape or cause further harm. Warwick she bound to the support beam where she had pinned him, his wrists fastened high enough that standing was his only option. Let him spend the night on legs that trembled with exhaustion. Let him taste a fraction of what his victims had endured. Holbrook required different handling. Her shattered wrist had begun to swell grotesquely, and despite everything, Renata was not cruel enough to let anyone suffer unnecessarily. She fashioned a splint from wooden slats and torn fabric, stabilizing the injury with the same efficiency she had used to inflict it. "You broke my wrist," Holbrook whispered as Renata worked. Her voice was hollow, stripped of the vicious confidence that had defined her for weeks. "My career is over. Your career ended the moment you participated in murder." Renata finished the splint and moved away without sympathy. "You chose this path. Now you walk it to its end." Linnea proved invaluable through the long night. Whatever guilt had paralyzed her before had transformed into desperate determination to help. She checked bindings, monitored the injured, and helped Renata catalog the evidence scattered throughout the station. The video recordings alone would be damning, but the medical supplies told their own story. Sedatives, syringes, implements designed for inflicting pain while minimizing visible marks. This was not improvised cruelty. This was infrastructure built over years and refined through practice. "How long?" Yusuf asked quietly. He sat against the wall where Renata had positioned him, wrapped in a thermal blanket from the emergency supplies. "How long have you known what they were doing?" since before I arrived. Renata settled beside him, allowing herself a moment of stillness between security checks. My cousin was murdered here 2 years ago. The official investigation was buried before it began. So, I became an unofficial investigation. Yusuf was silent for a long moment. When I warned you that first week, you already knew everything I was telling you. I knew some of it. Renata allowed herself a small, weary smile. You confirmed details I had only suspected, and you gave me hope that there were good people here who would speak the truth when the time came. She turned to meet his eyes. That time is coming, Yusuf. When we get back, there will be questions, investigations, pressure from powerful people who want this to disappear. I need to know if you're willing to stand up. Yusuf looked at the bound figures of those who had terrorized him for years. The fear was still there in his eyes, but something else had joined it. Something harder. They killed my roommate. They made me watch them hurt people and said nothing because I was afraid. He straightened against the wall. I am done being afraid. Dawn arrived gray and sodden, the storm having exhausted itself sometime in the small hours. Renata heard the helicopters before she saw them, the distinctive thrum of rotors cutting through forest silence. She stepped outside the ranger station and raised her hand as the first aircraft descended into the clearing. Cross was on the ground before the skids touched earth. His face held the particular tension of a handler who had spent hours unable to contact his operative, unsure if she was alive or dead. When he saw her standing in the doorway, something in his expression loosened. Ghost. He crossed the clearing in long strides. Status: 8 hostiles secured. 2 friendlies plus myself, no serious injuries. Renata gestured toward the station. Evidence is intact. They recorded everything, Cross. Every ritual, every victim. Years of documentation that they kept as trophies. Cross's jaw tightened with barely contained fury. Marsh, still at the academy. But the financial records tie him directly to cover up payments. Combined with what we have here, he will not be able to run far enough. More helicopters arrived as they spoke, disgorging teams of Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents and military police. The clearing transformed from isolated crime scene to coordinated operation within minutes. Agents entered the station with cameras and evidence bags. Medics assessed the prisoners. Statements were taken from Yusuf and Linnea, their words captured for the prosecution that would follow. Warwick was loaded onto a helicopter with his hands still bound, his face a mask of dried blood and disbelief. He had not spoken since Renata took him down, his aristocratic composure shattered beyond repair. As the aircraft lifted off, she watched him through the window and felt no satisfaction. Only the cold clarity of a mission completed. Holbrook went next, then the others, until only Renata remained with Cross in the trampled clearing. Admiral Ayelerin is flying in personally, Cross said. She wants to debrief you before the media storm hits. He paused, studying her face with the careful attention of someone who knew that missions like this left marks invisible to casual observation. How are you holding up? Renata considered the question. She thought about Darius screaming her name in a place like this, begging for mercy that never came. She thought about the years she had spent wondering if she could have saved him if she had only known. She thought about the faces of every cadet who had suffered in silence because the system designed to protect them had been corrupted by money and power. I will be better when Marsh is in custody, she said finally. I will be better when every family who lost someone here knows the truth about what happened. She turned toward the remaining helicopter. But right now I have a job to finish. Cross nodded and fell in a step beside her. Then let us finish it. Commandant Marsh was arrested in his office at 0900, still wearing his dress uniform and clutching a cup of coffee that shattered on the floor when NCIS agents informed him of the charges. Conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, accepting bribes in exchange for covering up violent crimes. The list continued as they led him through the administrative building in handcuffs, past staff members who stared in mute shock and cadets who would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. Renata watched from across the parade ground. She had showered and changed into a clean uniform bearing her actual rank insignia, and the transformation still seemed to startle cadets who passed her. The nervous transfer student from Nevada had vanished entirely, replaced by someone whose posture and presence commanded attention without effort. Cross appeared beside her as Marsh was loaded into a waiting vehicle. Senator Warwick is already making calls. His lawyers are claiming entrapment, coercion, violation of due process. Every angle they can find. Let them try. Renata's voice was flat with exhaustion and certainty. We have video evidence of 8 attempted murders. We have financial records spanning 15 years. We have witnesses willing to testify. She watched the vehicle pull away, carrying the man who had sold the safety of his cadets for personal enrichment. No amount of money can make that disappear. The Academy Assembly was called for 1,400 hours. Every cadet, every instructor, every staff member gathered on the parade ground beneath a sky that had finally cleared to pale autumn blue. They stood in formation and waited for answers that had been denied them for years. Admiral Constance O'Yelleran took the podium. She was a small woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen decades of service. And when she spoke, her voice carried across the silent grounds like a judgment delivered. What happened at this academy was a betrayal, she said. A betrayal of the trust placed in leadership. A betrayal of the values we claim to uphold. A betrayal of every cadet who came here believing they would be protected and trained and prepared to serve their country. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. That betrayal ends today. She outlined what would follow. A complete investigation into every incident, every cover-up, every payment made to silence victims. Counseling services for affected cadets. Reformed oversight procedures. Criminal prosecution for everyone involved, regardless of family connections or political influence. And then she introduced Lieutenant Commander Renata Voss. Renata walked to the podium through a sea of faces she had come to know over the past months. Cadets who had ignored her suffering. Instructors who had looked the other way. And scattered among them, a few who had shown her kindness when it cost them nothing and courage when it cost them everything. She found Yusuf in the crowd. He stood straighter than she had ever seen him, his bruised face lifted with something that looked like pride. Beside him, Linnea wiped tears from her cheeks without bothering to hide them. 2 years ago, Renata began, my cousin Darius Voss died at this academy. She let the name hang in the air, claiming space it had been denied. He was murdered by people who believed their wealth and connections placed them above consequences. He was silenced by an institution that valued reputation over justice. And for 2 years, I carried his memory like a wound that would not heal. She gripped the podium and looked out at the assembled cadets. I came here to find the truth. I found something more. I found an entire system designed to protect predators and punish victims. I found young people too afraid to speak because they had learned that speaking meant suffering. I found courage in unexpected places and cowardice in positions of authority. She took a breath. But I also found people willing to stand up when it mattered most. People who chose truth over safety, justice over silence. Her eyes found Yusuf again, then Linnea. What happens next will not be easy. There will be pressure to minimize, to excuse, to move on without full accountability. Do not allow it. Every one of you has a voice. Every one of you has a choice. Use them. Speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. Honor the memory of those we lost by building something better in this place. She stepped back from the podium. The silence held for a long moment. Then Yusuf began to clap. Linnea joined him. The sound spread through the formation like fire through dry grass until the entire parade ground thundered with applause that carried grief and relief and the first fragile notes of hope. Renata stood in the center of it and let herself feel, for the first time since this began, that Darius could finally rest. 3 weeks later, she visited his grave. The headstone was simple, bearing only his name and dates and the anchor symbol of the Navy he had loved. She knelt in the grass and placed her hand against the cold stone. I got them, she said quietly. Every single one. Warwick is facing life in prison. Marsh will never wear a uniform again. The families are being notified, the truth is being told, and reforms are already changing how the academies operate. She traced the letters of his name with her fingertip. I wish I could have saved you instead of avenging you. I wish I had known sooner. But I hope wherever you are, you know that your death meant something, that it broke the silence that let them hurt so many others. The wind stirred the trees above her, rustling leaves in a sound that might have been an answer. Renata rose and looked toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to set. Tomorrow she would return to her unit. Tomorrow she would be Ghost again, ready for whatever mission came next. But today, she was simply a woman who had kept a promise to someone she loved. She turned and walked away from the grave, carrying Darius with her in the place where wounds become wisdom and grief becomes resolve. If the story moved you, we would love to hear from you. Drop a comment and share your favorite moment, or tell us about someone in your life who showed hidden strength when it mattered most. Your stories remind us why courage still matters in this world.